I think okay, good evening. It is August the 9th, 2021. Welcome to the West Shore Photography Club meeting. Tonight we have an image review. There is no theme, and we'll introduce our reviewer in just a moment. But before we do, I'd like to turn the meeting over to our VP, Joe Farrell.
Well, thank you, Mr. Baker, Mr. President. We had a really exciting trip on Saturday to the Hershey Gardens, and Elaine really led a wonderful group of 15 folks. And it was so good. I think maybe Facebook was sort of, their servers were a little bit overwhelmed maybe this weekend, because everybody was posting images and getting feedback and comments. It was just very heartening to see that. And Elaine did a real special treat for us. She made sure that the weather at 9 o'clock was not too hot. And she also brought in the clouds. And that was just spectacular. And thank you, Elaine, for doing that for us. And that's not going to be the end of what she's done. She has another session coming on Wednesday night. It's her and Patty Volpe are going to be talking. Elaine's going to finish off what she did last week. She didn't get quite through it on some of her images, which are stellar. And then she's invited Patty to join us. And Patty, you're going to talk about what, if I may ask? Well,
I'm here. Sorry.
okay.
I'm going to be concentrating on applying artistic filters to photography.
Okay, great. That should be interesting because you have very artistic images with lots of different twists and turns to it. So that's going to be good to see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. It'll be half an hour with Elaine and then half an hour with Patty on Wednesday night. And then next Wednesday night, if I have my calendar right, Mike Donovan is going to lead us on a trip over.
Oh, didn't we change that to October?
We did change it to October. Scrap that. Forget that. Thank you.
I just looked at that myself.
All right. And then next Monday night, we're going to have a program. It's going to be a continuation of our plugin series. And on Monday night, we're going to talk about the digital noise, defining what it is, and then what a plugin is. And then we're going to go through and talk about the Topaz denoise and maybe the Sharpen program, which will be is a great tool that has really been taking the industry by storm. And we're going to talk about that and how that can help mitigate any noise that you have in your images, if in fact you think it's difficult, if it's inappropriate. So that'll be for next Monday night. So I'm done.
Very good. Thanks, Joe. And then just for folks who are planning ahead, you want to make note that the following Monday night then, which is August the 23rd, will be another image review. And again, there's no theme. And then on Saturday, August the 28th, we have a trip to Italian Lake. Am I correct, Joe? And Mary's going to lead that. Yep. Mary, do you want to say anything about that trip? Caught you off guard. Sorry.
It's a really pretty place. I think everyone's going to enjoy it. But the lake, the ducks, all the other birds that Joe knows about, the houses, I think everyone will enjoy it. It's a nice place to visit.
Good. Thanks, Mary. Is anybody co-leading that with you?
Joe, I think.
Okay. Very good. Very good. And then Sunday, you want to tell them about Sunday and the steam engines, Joe?
That one has not been confirmed yet, Dennis. We haven't gotten to it, but we hopefully have a special trip on that day, but we can't commit to that yet.
Okay. All right. Okay. I wanted to let you know that, well, you already know probably that the new club year begins in September. And the directors have been working feverishly, and especially the trips committee, in preparing for that upcoming year. We have the entire year, the meeting dates for the entire year pretty much finalized, and some of the programs already, and some of the trips for September, October, and November. So that will be issued very soon, all of the dates, so you can put those on your calendars so you don't miss anything. Okay, image reviews. we've been doing this for a while, right, guys? And you have a pretty good feel for the reviewers and their comments. And some of us were talking, and we think we need to up the ante a little bit, because when you present an image for a review, what are you looking for? You're looking for somebody to give you all likes and pats on the back? Hopefully not. If you are, go to Facebook. If you're looking for a seasoned professional photographer to critically analyze your image, point out its weaknesses, and make suggestions for improvement, boom, you're at the right place. So we want to make these image reviews and competitions worthwhile as a genuine learning experience. So we've asked the judges to step it up a little bit, to be a little more critical, look a little more carefully for things they would call deficiencies in the image, and make, as they have been, make suggestions for improvement. So please submit your images with that in mind. I know how delicate it can be when you're first starting out in photography, that if you get criticized, it hurts a little bit, because you think you're submitting a great image and somebody picks apart and, offers lots of suggestions for improvement. Try not to take that personally. Take it as a learning experience and use it to your advantage. Okay, so with that in mind, I'd like to have a few comments from our reviewer tonight. Everybody knows Bryson, if you've been on the meetings previously. Bryson Leidich, professional photographer from Harrisburg area, who's been in this business for, as he puts it, many years. I've asked Bryson before he starts reviewing just to share a little bit about his philosophy in critiquing images. So Bryson, it's all yours, partner. Thanks for doing this for us tonight.
Absolutely. I had an experience when I was beginning to do this, and I mean beginning. I mean, this happened to me when I was maybe 2 or 3 years into photography at the most. And that experience really shaped everything that happened to me in photography since. And that was that I managed to get together with a group of photographers who were not only exceptional at what they do, but were willing to be critical. Let's put it that way. I was a member of the Harrisburg Camera Club, and that was fine. I was in the competitions and this and that, everything else. And I love to tell stories. So you opened the door. This, good luck. We only have 12 images tonight, so we have a little bit of time. So I'll kind of, put this to you. Some of you may have heard this before, but I remember one of the competitions that I was at in one of the first years that I was taking pictures. And Henry Troop, if any of you remember that name, was the judge that night. And he was looking at a portrait, and it was a 16 by 20 black and white print. And as he was doing the review and judging the image, he said, first of all, this image was underexposed, and a few other comments that he made about it. And my brain went, hold it. He's looking at a print and telling me that the negative is underexposed. This is a brain I have to tap. And I did. And it was the best move I ever made. I introduced myself to Henry, and I became a friend of his. And I joined a group of photographers who got together. I would say a third of them at that point were professionals. And after the fact, 20 years later, 80% of them were professionals, of the people who were in that group. But we had one giant philosophy, and that is we were all into the fine art of photography. We were looking at, Adams and Weston and Paul Caponegro and people of that sort back in the 70s. But the idea was that we weren't looking at calendars, we weren't looking at greeting cards, we weren't looking for pretty pictures, we were looking for art. We were looking for the basic foundation of what made an image a good image. And if you brought an image, a print, most of the stuff we showed were 8x10 prints, and the vast majority of them were black and white at that point. But you brought a print in and put it up on the board. And God help you if it was junk, because you would walk out bleeding from your ears, because it really was a group of people that wouldn't let you get away with anything that was less than at least your best effort. Now, if it was your best effort, that was fine and dandy, because people pretty much learn how to, this is what I can expect from this person, and this is what I can expect from this person. But one of the biggest things that I think I learned from that, and I think that applies here tonight, and that is when you put an image up and it starts to be criticized, yeah, you're the maker and you're going to sit there and you're going to be embarrassed and this and that and everything else. But the rest of the people in the group are looking at an image and hearing criticism about what's good about it, what's bad about it, what could be improved about it. That's it. So the people looking are learning from the picture. They're not picking on you. And I think that was probably a very, very important lesson to me, is say, okay, you're the guy that happened to supply the ammunition for the evening, if you will. But the idea was that you needed to get together and learn from the picture that is on the screen, or in our case here, or the print that was up on the wall, in order to learn how to make better images. The other thing I learned from that is looking at pictures. I look at pictures constantly. I look at pictures in an unbelievable variety of styles by an unbelievable variety of photographers. And that's something I do to this day, because that was the other thing that Henry instilled in me. He said, you have to look at pictures. You have to see what other people are doing, and you have to look at the work of people who are way above your station and see how much you can grasp at that as a goal for your photography. So you don't just try to make the best picture that you can this week, and maybe a little bit better than it was last week. You want to make something that just breaks the boundaries. It just goes beyond what you could do before, and try to be the best that you can be. And it's a wonderful thing to wrap your head around, and it can take you a while to do it, especially as there's two aspects of it. One of them is the artistic aspect of it. The other one is the technical aspect of it. And the artistic, some people just come by that naturally. And it's, God bless them. I had to work for it. The technical for me was the easy part. And for a lot of people, that's the hard part. And I get that. And it can take you years and years to understand the technical, or to understand the artistic, depending on where your particular moods and ambitions happen to go, and where your talents lie. So enough of that. I think you get the idea. The idea is that what we want to do is share experiences and look at what is presented in front of us and use it as a learning tool. And we'll go from there. Does that work, suit you, Dennis?
Thank you. Yes, I think that sets the stage very nicely.
Okay, shall I share my screen, or?
Yes, please.
And go with this thing. Okay. Beautiful screen.
Excellent.
Okay, does that work?
Yes,
Good.
it does.
Okay, click. Number 1, skateboard ballet. Okay, there's a couple of things that we usually react to when we see a picture for the first time, and one of them is the impact that image has on the viewer. And this image has good impact. You look at this, you go, oh wow, good, nice picture. If you're the maker of this image, you can be proud of what you've done. but you also have to analyze what you've done and seriously critique every aspect of it. And this particular case, I think it's fairly well done, but there are a few technical issues with it that that I think I can use as learning tools. There's two ways. This is a composite. This is obviously was not shot this way. And if the maker managed to fool you into thinking it was shot this way, well, good for him. But that's why you got to look and say, okay, why do I believe or not believe what I'm looking at? Because that's really important. I think this could be used as a companion image to an article on skateboarding, whatever, that kind of thing, and easily pass muster. There's two ways to create a composite. One of them is to isolate the subject and then copy that subject and paste it on a new background. If you do that, your selection of that subject in the first place has to be astoundingly accurate. Let's put it that way. Because when you paste it on a new background, anything you did wrong is going to stick out like a sore thumb. And you need to be able to convince people that what you did is just as good as it could possibly be. There are some flaws in this. There's a couple of little things like the roundness of this wheel here, and there's no hole in the shoelace, et cetera, and a couple little white edges that sort of show up and give away the fact that it was composited. Now, you don't see them at this magnification. You only see them if you start to really pay attention to the details, and that's fine. But there's another way to do the same thing, and that is to just do a rough outline of the subject and copy it and paste it onto the new background, and then mask what you don't want to see so that you are revealing the subject and the background is showing through. If you do that instead of cutting and pasting, if you do it with the mask, you have a lot more options because you can go in and you can paint on the mask and you can adjust the mask in a variety of different ways, and you can improve on your selection and pick up on little mistakes and blow it up to 800% or bigger and really refine the edges and make sure you just simply didn't miss anything. So my recommendation would be that cut and paste is not the way to do the best possible composite. Masking would be better. I think that probably gets to the heart of it. The other aspect that a mask has is that it can be blurred. Most selections that people make, especially masks, are way too hard. In other words, people expect everything to be precise. And that's not how digital photography works. Digital photography is pixels and they're squares. And whenever we have something that has a curve to it, those squares will show up as errors, if you will. And the way we get around that is a thing called anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing is when you take the edge and you have one part that's this dark blue and another part that's this light blue, and you put 2 or 3 pixels in between them that vary in their intensity and fool the eye into thinking that that transition is a very smooth curve. And that's going to give you a better result visually and fool people, if you will, better than a hard cutout. So, take that into consideration if you're into compositing. The other thing is believability. If you look at the light on the subject and you look at the background, it'd be very nice to believe that that sky was behind him, but I think the sky's a little dark to convince me that that's the sky that was behind him. I would like to see that sky a little bit lighter. So you have to look at each individual component part of any given image and really analyze it and say, is this the best that it can be in terms of the story that I'm trying to tell with this picture? So now, do we get into who did it, or do we just move on?
Yes, we're going to ask the photographer to comment. So would he or she please do so?
From Mary Eileen Carson. And I have been fooling around with compositing for, I don't know, better than a year, trying different things. I've had a couple of nice successes. I've had a whole lot of, they just plain sucked, and so we dropped them and moved on. This particular photo, I took this, I think this is a couple years old, from the first time at the Steelton skateboard field visit, that first time. I particularly like the position of the body, the way, you know, his hand is and everything, the way he was just flying up, and that, you know, I got the board in there and everything. And the background, I just didn't like the background. So I tried every which way I could figure to try to change the background to make this look better. And finally I gave up and decided I'm going to have to try something else. I'm just going to have to take him and put him with a different background, because the background just wasn't working and I just couldn't get it to work from the original. So I've been fooling around with this for a couple of months now, and I decided to submit it because I, you know, sometimes I look at it and say, oh, not bad. And sometimes I look at it and say, you know, this sucks. This looks like you pasted it on there. So yeah, which I did do, but you know, I'm trying to avoid that. So yeah, I particularly wanted to get some critical input on this because I'm still trying to figure out what to do with this guy. I want to put him with the right background that's going to look, you know, good, but not take away from that position that he was in, what he was doing at that time. He was very good. He was very good at, and I took a lot of pictures of him, and this is the one I like the most. So I'm still trying to figure out what to do with him. Yeah, the sky, I realized I couldn't put him against any old sky because this shot was taken in sunshine. I mean, so you got a lot of sunshine on his back. So I tried this background. I tried this sky picture because I've got a bunch of sky pictures. And so, yeah, I need to maybe go for something a little different. But I'm really interested in what you said, Bryson, about anti-aliasing. What was that you were saying? Yeah. I didn't quite catch that.
Anti-aliasing, if you look very carefully, and the easiest place to see it is on text. If you look at the round part of a letter like the B or a P or something, and you blow it up, you'll see that it isn't a hard round edge against a background. So if you have a white background and a black letter, you don't have a hard edge around it. You have a series of steps from the black to the white that are different shades of gray. And at 100% on screen, they fool the eye into thinking that that round is not a series of steps, and that's called anti-aliasing. And the same thing happens in any photograph. If you actually look at the top of a building against the sky, if you look at him against whatever background he was against, you will see that same effect. Blow the image way up and look at transitions between colors or between surfaces. You know, you got a hard edge and a soft background. You will see the anti-aliasing, and it's very, very obvious. And that's one of the techniques that you use to manipulate the way people see things. On the positive side, I think the way you captured him is absolutely great. I think, you know, this is a very good capture of him. And I agree that maybe you haven't found the right background yet, and that would be worth doing because he's good. He's very good. So you've got a great picture here to start with. You just need to, you know, refine the work a little bit. So,
just figure out where to put them. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Do something totally dumb and see how it works.
Yeah. Well, I've done a few of those already, so yeah, it'll work. So yeah, I've started to try to fool around with composting, because it just intrigued me. So like I said, I've had a couple successes and a lot of, this isn't worth even looking at. So yeah, I want to work on him more because I really like the whole position of him and his way he has his hands and everything. So thank you.
You're welcome. I think it's, compositing is a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of work.
Oh yeah.
And trust me, one of my mentors said, I take 1,000 pictures for every good one. So, don't be disconcerted. Okay. I can't even pronounce this flower, but that's okay. I know the same thing about flowers that I know about birds. There's yellow ones and red ones and brown ones, etc. Names don't mean anything to me. So those people who understand flowers, my apologies. The image is good. I like the concept. I like the overall look. The impact of the picture to start with is pretty good. I have two little criticisms about composition. I think it's a little tight on the right. I think it's a little tight at the top. I would like to see this come down a little bit so there's more room up here. You've got nice room here and nice room here, so you got a good foundation, and then it seems like the top and the right side are closing in on the picture and throwing it out of balance. So, and that I think would be pretty easy to do. If this is a crop from a bigger image, then all you really have to do is just fuss with the crop a little bit. But since the background is so simplistic and so nicely out of focus, even if you had to create background, it would be fairly easy to do and make this work pretty well. The other thing that I would like to see, I see this as being the point of interest and the center of sharpness, and that's great. There are ways to enhance the sharpening of images. Some of them are complicated, some of them are fairly simple, and there are different tools that will allow you to do that. I think some localized sharpening of this center area would be valuable in terms of just really making it have a little bit more impact. Since it's the center of focus, it should also be the center of interest in other terms. And I think in that respect, the fact that it's dark, especially in the foreground part of it, is slightly unfortunate. I think maybe if you brightened it up a little bit, and that would be, you don't want to just simply brighten it. You want to brighten it, but maintain the contrast. You don't want to, flatten it out in the process, but I think this needs to be a little bit brighter and sharper to bring the eye right exactly where you want it to be. I don't see anything that distracts me enough to want to take anything out. At first, I thought maybe this was an issue, but to be honest with you, the more I look at the picture, the more I can live with it. There's a tiny little piece here I'd look at. I might finish this off, although you've got breaks other places, so it's maybe not so totally out of place relative to the entire picture. I think the color saturation is good, and I think the darker background works extremely well with the picture. So in that respect, I'm ready to say who done it.
Okay, would the photographer please identify him or herself? While we're waiting, Bryson, I've read some photographers talk about out of focus objects in the foreground. Yeah, you obviously aren't bothered by that.
Everything either works or doesn't within the context of the image. And in something like this, obviously, the out of focus petals in the foreground can't be a mistake. They just simply there. They exist. They are what they are. And in fact, in many cases, out of focus blurred objects used as framing devices in the foreground are appropriate. So I don't know, I think some people look for too much for rules and too much for ways to get into details. Every image has its own life, if you will, and needs to be in a certain place. And so I wouldn't put any particulars on that thought.
Okay, thank you.
So this is Patty Volpe. That's one of my images. And the name of the flower is a rudbeckia. Another name for a brown-eyed Susan. I really thank you for your critique on this. And you're spot on about the sides of the image and the top of the image. I could certainly expand both of those and improve this image and try and sharpen up that center a little bit. I also darkened that second center down on the left corner, trying to take the attention away from it just a little bit. So I did put a little treatment on that.
Good.
Thank you,
Very good.
Bryson.
Yep, good job. And you know, your fussing is minor, shall we say that?
Thank you very
order
much.
to-
Thank you.
Okay. Rebecca. Now I know. Kyle in black and white. From an impact point of view, this is not a competition photograph by any stretch of the imagination. The one of the things you need to have in your head is what is the content of the picture and what is the purpose of the content of the picture. If you're going to put this into a competition, I don't think you're going to do real well. I think it's a nicely done picture. I like the crop. I like the content. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. Maybe a little on the flat side in the midtones. That's a whole conversation that I think is difficult to have in a short period of time. But so I won't even bother going there. That just that's too difficult to get involved in. I think it's fairly well done. I think the black and white conversion is fairly well done. There is some loss of detail in here that I might prefer to keep, but that also is, you know, that's kind of nitpicking, if you will. So I could leave that alone too. So who done it?
That'd be me, Jim. Appreciate feedback. I never submitted a black and white picture before, so I wanted some feedback on how I did. I'll do a little bit digging and figure out how to unflatten the picture a little bit. Keep working on my black and white. So thank you.
Sure. Black and white conversion is an art form in itself. There's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a couple. If you're working in Photoshop as opposed to Lightroom, there's a bunch of tools in there that you can use. But even the tools that are handed to you really depend on how much you want to play around and fool with them in terms of you know, just gaining that punch that you want in the area of the subject that you want it. And one of the things that a lot of people miss in black and white conversion is how the color of the photo to begin with influences the black and white conversion. One of the little tricks that I've been playing with is to put a hue and saturation color layer underneath the black and white conversion, and then start playing with hue and saturation in the different channels and seeing how it affects the black and white. And that can be really, really interesting. And in some cases, it can be a saving grace, shall we say, and it can transform the image completely. So there's just a little something that you might want to, you know, give an extra shot to. Okay.
Hue and what?
Good. Hue saturation.
Hue saturation. Okay.
You can see that in Photoshop. You don't really have, you have it in Lightroom, but not in those terms. Okay, not as a layer, because you don't have layers in Lightroom.
Yeah, Bryson, you touched on the topic at some time later. I'd like you to address in more detail. You mentioned an image for competition, and at some later point, I'd like you to elaborate on that. What differentiates an image and makes it appropriate for a competition? So keep that in the back of your mind, if you will.
The back of my mind doesn't work real well, Dennis.
I'll remind you later. How's that?
I would
Bryson.
appreciate that. Okay. At the end of the day, I like this picture, and it's interesting from the standpoint that there's a lot of elements in it that really work well. The first thing you look at an image is composition, okay? Well, the first thing you look at is content. And we all do that automatically because the left side of our brain just won't let go. The first thing we have to do is identify everything in the picture, and that's a person, and that's a wall, and that's a flower, and that's a tree. That's what the left side of our brain does. And somewhere along the line, you have to try to train yourself to shut that down and start paying attention to the right side of the brain. And the right side of the brain says, how does the composition work? How does the balance work? How does the flow work? How does the contrast and color and other aspects of the image work that are influencing the way I see this picture and whether or not I like it? If you take this and you just sort of crop off a little bit on the right-hand side, a little bit on the bottom, and tighten it up just a little bit, I like that a little bit more. I think this is very heavy over here. I would also take this area and the wall and lower the whites, lower the highlight values a little bit. Now this is extremely easy to do in Photoshop once you know the technique. It's not really all that difficult to do in Lightroom either, because you can sort of make selections, if you will, and then you can fuss with the brightness and some of the contrast and things of that nature that will influence how bright this is. But my eye wants to go here and it wants to stay here, and it has a tendency to go boom, boom, and then go back, and then boom, boom, and then go back. So I would have a real desire to darken this and to darken this, crop a little bit off the bottom and a little bit off of the right in order to just really pay attention to what's going on back here. Now, this is the first one I'm going to speak about distractions. I'm real big on removing distractions. I will spend 15 minutes making an image look decent in terms of overall color and contrast, and then I'll spend 2 hours fussing with the distractions, because things that take your eye and take them away from what you're trying to say are not good things. This sign is something that the left-hand side of your brain keeps saying, what does that say? What does that say? What does that say? And you don't want that. You don't want that to happen. You want the right side of your brain to look at the content and the flow and the composition, and you don't want to be paying attention to the sign. I would remove the sign. That is not as hard as you think. So it's very, very simple to do. So I would do that. There's a little piece over here, a couple little dots up here, a couple things up here that I would probably take down just simply so that my eye doesn't want to jump into those locations and be distracted. And it's it's a kind of thing where I will do that and fuss with an image and then open it the next morning and find 15 things that I missed the first time. It goes with the idea that painters always say that there is no such thing as a finished painting. They are just simply abandoned because you can't stand working on them anymore. And there's an aspect of that that has that goes along with photography, and I'm a victim of it. So who did this?
It's mine. This is Elaine Shook. Thank you, Bryson. All of the things that you have brought up are the very things that I struggled with when I was processing this image, which is why I submitted the image. The wall in particular, I really struggled with because on one hand, I thought that the enormity of it really emphasized the diminutive stature of this woman at the end of this alleyway. As well as the length of that leading line where the wall joins the sidewalk there. On the other hand, I thought that it was out of balance. So I wasn't sure which was more important. I did try to crop it, and I did not like the aspect ratio, and I thought in some respects it wasn't as effective in leading to this woman, which really is the focal point of the whole image. So I struggled with that. I also struggled with the lighting on the wall and the sidewalk. I like contrast, I like it a lot. And I thought that by darkening too much, that would kind of lessen the contrast with the end of this walkway where it is very dark and then leads into the light again at the end. So I have very mixed feelings about it. I absolutely understand what you are saying, and I have those same feelings on one side of my brain. I also struggled with that sign. I did darken it. It was quite bright originally, and I darkened it to make it more subtle, but I wasn't sure that removing it wouldn't make it look just a little too flat over there. Wasn't a big issue for me. It certainly is easy enough to remove it. But I do
Good.
appreciate your comments. I'm glad that I'm at
Absolutely.
least thinking along the same lines as you are.
Yeah, I think I would definitely argue for removing the sign because I don't think it helps the picture. The composition aspects of cropping and everything is an individual personal thing. And so that's my suggestion, but I wouldn't argue with you if you disagreed. That's perfectly fine. There's several ways to change the brightness of something, and you can maintain contrast. Are you working in Lightroom or Photoshop?
Both.
Both. If you're working in Photoshop with something like this and you select the values, and so you end up with certain levels of gray that are selected both here and here, or even in two separate layers. You can lower the whites in order to diminish the brightness of that, but you can also add black in order to maintain the contrast or even accentuate it. You can do it in levels. My preference is to do things like that in curves because you have more control. But if you're not comfortable with curves, you can do it in levels, and you would use the black slider at the top to increase the contrast and the white slider at the bottom to lower the whites. That's something that some people just never play with. So that's maybe something that you haven't given consideration to. But you got a good thing here, and I think this would be a good competition photo, by the way. I think this just needs a little bit of refinement to have a little bit more impact. That's all.
Elaine, could I ask how you handled the color on that one? Color versus black and white?
Severely desaturated. That wall had a lot of yellow tones in it, which did not look good at all. So heavily desaturated enough so that it took all of the color out of the wall essentially and left the greens very muted, which I wanted. I wanted to see the green in the leaves. It didn't look as, I tried converting it to black and white and it just didn't look as impactful to me as the subtle greens in there.
Interesting. I think our members would found that comment interesting.
Yeah, I like the fact that you kept the green. Yeah, very good. All right, Joe, you asked for it. Joe sent me an email and said, beat me up more or less. I have a couple of questions about it, Joe. First of all, are these trees, can't tell on this, are these trees sharp?
Yes,
this
they are,
particular-
they are sharp. It was focus stacked.
Okay, good, very good. All right, fine. Then we can eliminate that as any kind of an issue. In other words, you're not, just for the educational benefit of others, you're not losing sharpness here by focusing on the foreground. So we're not depending on depth of field in order to have sharpness in the background. You're actually using focus stacking to make sure that both of them are sharp. Fine, that's great. I actually wouldn't mind if some of the foreground were less than totally sharp, which would be one of the elements that would force my eye to the background trees, if that's what you want, okay? I'd like to see more color in the background. You've got an awful lot of color up here. The intensity of color in the foreground is pretty good, and the background seems to be less colorful by comparison. And in that respect, I have way strong tendency to pay more attention to the foreground and less attention to the background. Now, there's two things you can do there. Yes, you can increase the color saturation or the color contrast of the background, and I would do that. I would possibly lower these cyans so that they get a little bit darker and put some more impact in there. But the other thing you can do, and this is something that I do a lot, but a lot of people don't think to do, and that is to lower the saturation of the stuff that you do not want to pay attention to. So if you lowered the color saturation of some of these foreground elements and increase the color saturation in the background, that would shift the eye from the foreground to the background. And I think that's what you're attempting to get to in the picture. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Then they got this element over here and this element over here. I would darken them both. I would remove this bright spot here, this little one here, this one here. And I'd leave this one alone maybe. And and I would darken this area of the tree so that it more resembles this area of the tree, again, to control where the eye goes in the picture. And I want that eye to go back here. I think that's what you want. So anything that you can do that just simply takes away from the visual impact of the foreground is going to help you move your eye to the background. Otherwise, I think you've done good.
Bryson, can I ask you about the center cactus that you see that is darker? And you said, would you lighten that right there?
This.
Mm-hmm.
When I first noticed it, I see an unfortunate thing going on here, and that's boom, boom, boom. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Because yeah, and I think if you took the brightness of this lighter area in here down, which is what I was talking about, that considered this part of that foreground element thing. If you took this highlight values down here, that would automatically make this more important. You could brighten it. I'd be careful not to do it too much because you don't want it to take away from the trees, because this is your primary subject matter up here. Okay. So maybe you could do that. I don't know. I think if you darken this, that might have an influence on this, because every element of the image kind of functions and balances against every other element. So yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You are most welcome, sir. Loon lunch. I like seafood, but this is a little raw for me. The compositionally speaking, I like the content, but I think compositionally it's a little not right. And I have a hard time figuring out if this were my picture, what would I do with it? This guy here isn't a problem because what's important is his head. This is interesting, but it doesn't mess up the composition. So where he sits in the frame is fine. But this mom, if you will, is so big and so close to the edge that I really want to say I need more room on the right-hand side. Secondarily, I don't think I need all of the top, so I would tend to make this more of a panoramic style picture. I would crop off maybe 15 or 20% of the top. And then I would add a vignette that darkens the highlights. It wouldn't be a very strong vignette. It would be one of those things that you feel more than you see, if you can understand what I'm trying to say. But there's so much brightness going on in the background, and it's so busy that it's really hard for your eye to pay attention to what's going on down here and not jump around. So I think if you could lower those values a little bit, a little bit of a crop and a little bit of darkening at the top, maybe between wherever you crop, maybe just below that line. And this line, if you could just darken that a little bit, you could force the eye down to the birds, and I think that would help the overall balance of the image. Okay? Who done it?
It's me, Rich Scar. Thanks, Bryson, for that. Yeah, I wrestled with some of those things. I probably tried to squeeze this into a set format of 8 by 10 or whatever. I agree with you. I kept wrestling with the top as well and cutting it down. Yeah, this was as you can imagine, this was a struggling picture. I took this photo while rocking on a pontoon boat up in New Hampshire. the baby is obviously fuzzy, that you just, and I worked with topaz and sharpen on that as best I could without making it look too artificial. And then of course you get the mother, or this could be mother or father in this case, is so dark and it lacks detail. That was really tricky. And the fish was a little bit fuzzy because it was moving, it didn't quite have the speed up. But all the comments you made are excellent. It makes me want to kind of stretch a little more than I was willing to do before your comments. So thanks.
Very good, no problem. You did mention something that I think bears me commenting on, and that is aspect ratio. I gave up on aspect ratios a long time ago. I figure out where the left, right, top, and bottom need to be, and the heck with what it fits into. I don't worry about, well, if you look at an image, if it's 4 by 6, 5 by 7, or 8 by 10, and you try to make it any of the others, they don't fit. So
Yeah,
they
you're
aren't compatible with each other, if you will. So trying to lock yourself into one of them is really kind of self-defeating. And what I did a long time ago was just unlock that aspect ratio box or lock, and then just make the edges wherever they need to be to make that picture look as good as it can possibly look. And that's the end of that conversation.
Great, thank you.
Very well. This is nice. I like it. I looked very, very carefully to make sure that the schoolhouse itself was sharp, because this is the obvious primary subject and it should be the sharpest part of the picture. I wouldn't mind if the fence posts were a little soft. So in that respect, I would be very careful. And I can't tell in a JPEG on a PDF whether that's the case or not, but I'll assume that this is sharp and then say that's fine, nothing more need to be said. I am a little concerned with the relationship of materials in the image. I think if you had taken a step to the right, this would have moved to the left, and then you would have had this post over here, and the schoolhouse over here, because the schoolhouse really wouldn't move very much, but the post would. All right. So if the post comes over here, then we have an element here, and it would kind of lead you into the picture, if you will. It's not a radical leading line, but it would be a leading element. Let's put it that way. That I think would help to balance the picture a little bit better. I would possibly crop a little bit off the bottom. I like what's happening here. I like what's happening here and here in terms of texture, but then these little bright spots at the bottom don't seem to do anybody any good. If cropping bothered you after you're done balancing it, then you could just simply do some retouching to either the tonal values or some other method of making these a little bit less important to the eye. Otherwise, I think it's pretty well done. I think a lot of photographers like contrast, and they like contrast to the point that they do themselves harm in terms of the whites and the blacks in an image. They make the whites too bright, they make the blacks too dark, and losing all of this detail and information down here, I don't think is a particularly good idea. If you look at the work of people who do this stuff all the time, you'll find that the preservation of low-end detail is one of the things that marks a really, really good photograph. And a lot of things are done. Now, a lot of other photographers don't say, they don't care, that black, that's all there is to it. And that's fine. But if you darken something more than is necessary, you drag low-end grays down to black and you lose shadow detail. And very, very often it's not a big deal to bring that detail up and just have a picture that has a little bit more of a softer look and a little bit more detail. And I think that could be a good thing. So there you go. Who?
Yeah, Bryson, this is Mark Albano. It was my picture. Thanks for the comments. I think I wrote down some questions I had, and I think you hit just about all of them with your comments. So I appreciate it. But I did have one other question, and the question is, what considerations would you give to something like this if you wanted to print it? Would you process it any different?
Well, printing is its own monster. And one of the things that you need to know if you're going to print something is where the highlight and shadow values will print. For example, if you take blacks down to 0, you're not doing yourself any favors. If very, very often, depending on the material you're using and the paper you're using, et cetera, you can have something at a value of 15 that will print black to the eye. And so, having something like this go way, way down, you would find probably if you printed this that it would be darker than you expected it to be. So if you're going to print something, you have to have in your mind a whole concept of where do the whites have to be and where do the blacks have to be in order to print properly and give me a picture that looks like what I see on my monitor. That is if you will, is an art in itself. And that takes a little bit more work. It also depends on the quality of the printer or where you're going to send it to have it printed.
Great, thank you.
Sure enough. The blacks in this picture make it very, very difficult for me to determine where the top is. So I will just make an assumption that this is sticking with an aspect ratio that would be considered more or less normal. And if that's the case, then I think that there's a whole lot of black in this picture that doesn't need to be there. Based on, pretty much on the conversation we just had, I think that the darks in this picture have been taken way down too far, and they're dragging the grays, like these grays that are in the sky here, they're dragging them down along with them. And that means that this separation in the background, whether that's clouds or If this is maybe a mountain range with sky behind it, I can't tell because there's not enough detail to make that determination. I think you're losing information that could be interesting in terms of support information and the balance of the image. I wouldn't leave all that black up here. I would crop down to maybe in about here and make more of a panorama out of this again. I think these blacks are just way, way too far down in order to make sense to me. I don't see the image as being particularly sharp, and I'm not entirely sure why. The tree, if you look at it and if you blow it up, I mean, you know, you can do this with with Acrobat Reader, and it's got kind of funny edges and little things going on here that don't make any sense to me. So I'm really not sure why they aren't better delineated. I would almost want to guess that somebody is trying for an infrared look and manipulated the tonal values in some way in order to get that. And I think they lost some of the detail in the process. These whites do not go to 255. They look like they're bright white, but that's by comparison to the rest of the image. They really are in the high 220s to 230s. And that leads me to believe that maybe they may have been blown out in the original capture and were just simply grayed down. I would think that would be a little bit unfortunate. Good highlight exposure is essential in quality digital capture. Then you deal with the other end, the black end of the spectrum, as a secondary consideration. You have to deal with the highlights first. Then you deal with the shadows. And you can do this by looking at the histogram. If you take a picture, you look at the histogram on the back of the camera, and the highlight values end up at about, you know, 2/3 or 3/4 of the way over, and there's this big empty space over here. You've lost detail, and you've lost the opportunity for more information at the bottom, and you've lost the opportunity for better information at the top. That's something that's a little hard to understand, especially if you have a tendency to chip on the back of your camera and go, that looks too bright, and then you delete the exposure you probably should have kept. It's a learning experience. Whoops, sorry. Hello. Keep your finger off the wheel, Bryson. Okay, so anyway, who done it?
Hi, Bryson. Yeah, thanks for your comments. It's Ron Stefacek. It's funny because I'm looking at the same image on my high res monitor, and it's an altogether different photo. It's actually sharper, but I do appreciate your comments. Yeah, I'm gonna try with the lightening up the top and cropping down. I think the lower corners is I threw a vignette on there and I probably overdid it. So
Yeah.
thanks
Yeah.
for your comments.
Absolutely. You never know. There are different ways to make JPEGs out of things. And if you're doing it and you're not doing it in the best possible way, you can really damage an image. I would work at least 8 or 8 or 10 at a value if you were of the picture in order to not have the JPEG compression become something that victimizes your image. And
Yeah.
I don't know how you guys come up with that stuff, but keeping those numbers high is a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
That by the way is it is an infrared image. It was shot with a 590 nanometer filter, if you will. It's actually the this was shot outside my car window. I stopped in the middle of the road. I saw this and just hung the camera out the window and shot it. But yeah, there's some processing that's why I submitted this to get
Is that a full spectrum capture,
No,
or
it's,
do you know?
It's a life pixel, what they call super color.
Okay, well, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
That isn't that super color, that's a full spectrum infrared capture. And
Okay.
so it requires there's a whole series of steps that go along with that in order to process those images. And I am far from an expert on that. I have a friend who does a lot of that, so I know that it exists, but it's not something I'm an expert at all. So I won't go any further than that with I'll just be sticking my foot in my mouth. So, but very good, sir, very good.
Thanks for your comments.
Absolutely. Okay, this is a nice capture. I like this. I think the biggest issues I have more to do with cropping than they do with anything else. I don't think there's anything I would necessarily do to the tonal values. The fact that this goes pretty much right up the middle of the picture just sort of unsettles me a little bit. So I think if we crop down in here and then we crop in over here somewhere, so we put this closer to the 60-40 or 1/3, 2/3, that aspect, the cropping points, the highlight points of the image, put this over more to 1/3. That would suit me a little bit better. So I would take this in and this up. There's blank space here you don't really need. Just come up here and over here. And then I think you would find that it would strengthen the impact of the image. A vignette would probably help a little bit. Now, when I talk about vignettes, I talk about them in terms of feeling, not seeing. My vignettes are usually very subtle. And the idea is that as soon as you see the vignette, you've gone too far. You need something that just basically grabs a hold of those corners and edges and pushes your eye toward the thing that you want to look at, and no further than that. So end of comments. Who did it?
That's me, Merle Hirsch. Yeah, I see what you're saying with the moving that crop up and moving it over. I thought putting it in the center gives you all that different geometry there, and pulled it. This was captured at a bridge down in Indian River in Delaware. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. The thing is that I don't see that if you crop here and you look at what's outside of the crop, there isn't a lot of geometry here.
That's true.
It's mostly over here. So if you get rid of the stuff that isn't as impactful on the visual aspects of it, you tend to push the attention over to where it has more influence. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. I see that's kind of a void there almost. So thank you.
I see. I sure enough, I see it as a good image. I think it just could have a little bit more impact if it were cropped so that it would just sit a little bit better. Okay. The exposure on the primary subject matter is really nice. I think the balance, the composition is good. The sharpness appears to be significant, so there's no problem there. But I do see the blacks as being too black. And I say that to the point where you don't see the edges of what's going on here. There's got to be an edge down here that supports that leg, and there has to be more to these two shoes. This is sitting on something. So I think that the blacks are kind of down far enough to start taking away from potential detail that I think could really, really make this a lot more interesting. not that it isn't interesting to begin with. I think it's very good. And I like the way the middle tones here work so that the highlights and mid-tone values really show up and make you feel the texture of the fabrics is really, really good. And that means that this mid-tone exposure is pretty good. It also could mean that the primary exposure on this was probably a little lower than it needed to be, which sort of handed you this instead of you having to create it in post-processing. But the problem is that in the process of that, your lower values went darker than they needed to be. This supporting element here in terms of composition playing against the primary character here is really, really good. I think if this fellow were just sitting there all by himself, this picture would not be nearly as good. This is really important stuff in my estimation. I think it's well done. Good picture. Who did it?
This is Dave Marchetto. Thanks very much, Bryson. I appreciate those comments. I grew up on circus clowns and rodeo clowns and the occasional psycho clown and horror films, and wasn't too familiar with this character, who's really a dramatic European clown. I learned quite a bit, and actually, Bryson, I was going to ask if you think it has enough dynamic range. Maybe the blacks are too black for you, but if that's true, what about the whites? I kind of wrestled with that. I sort of settled on maybe more mid-tone gray?
Well, yeah, but whites don't have to be pure white. You know, the whites in an image, pure whites, should be reserved for light sources and reflections of light sources. So otherwise, if they showed up in the image, they would have nowhere to show up. So people do have a tendency to make whites brighter than they should be, and they lose all of the subtlety of what's actually happening here. I think this is exceptionally well done. And you do have highlight values in here that are helping you. There's highlights on the face, if you will, and other places that help to define the shape of the subject, and I think that's good. Now, that doesn't say they couldn't be brighter. I mean, that's very possible, and the only way to know that is to go into levels and brighten them up, but don't brighten them up to the point where you start to lose all this subtle detail, because this is beautiful. This is really nice. But it is possible that those whites could be brighter. I just would not push it too far. And that's
Bryson,
what I say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Bryson, you mentioned whites at 220 and 230. Was that for infrareds, or what was that all about?
The tonal range of an image is 0 at black and 255 is white. Okay. And are you working in Lightroom or Photoshop?
Lightroom strictly.
Okay. In Lightroom, it's a little bit harder to make those determinations because you can't drop a probe on something, but you can mouse over it and see in the upper right-hand corner what those values are. If you make sure that the lab values are turned off so you can see RGB, and in something that is gray, you will see numbers that go from 0 in black to 255 in pure white. And then these values are going to be somewhere in the middle. These are going to be like 130, 140, 150, somewhere in that neck of the woods. And learning what those values are and what they represent in the grayscale can be very, very important and helpful in making a determination of how to process certain parts of the image. I think the white values here are great, but these values are too dark and gray, and you're losing detail down here in the bottom end. And I think if you, it can take a while for you to grasp those numbers and understand how they work, but it's something I think that you should pay attention to.
Yeah,
That's very
Lightroom-
helpful.
Lightroom actually confuses the issue, and their exposure values are expressed from 0 to 100.
That's
And Bryson,
true.
the last thing I want
Yeah.
to say about this is actually, you know, it's torn. It really looks good in color. The grades on the costume are a very glistening gold, and with warm light, it really is a different image. But you know, I finally decided on black and white, but I shot it in color.
Yeah. The Dennis, you're right about the 0 to 100, but there are ways of making other numbers show up. The problem with Lightroom, it's not really a problem, but the issue with Lightroom is that it doesn't presuppose the color space that the image is going to be in when it's done. And that's why it does the 0 to 100 as a percentage thing instead of 0 to 255 in the 3 different channels. If you can grasp that 0 to 100, which is also something you can do by using the lab values and using the L channel, which is the brightness channel. And if you can keep your whites below 95 or even 92 and your blacks above 10 or 15, you'll find that you'll get a lot more information in your image. But if you have those L values going all the way down to 0 and your brightness values up above 92 or 95, you start to get a very contrasty image and you start to lose detail at the opposing ends, if that makes any sense to you. If not, you heard it once, you'll hear it again.
Yeah. Hey, from your comments, Bryson, is there a time when totally black backgrounds are appropriate?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
And to a great degree, that's entirely up to the photographer. My problem here, like for example, I think this would be appropriately black. But the thing is that if in the process you lose the detail in areas that should not be black, then you've made a mistake. So the black background isn't the problem. The
Okay.
black in the subject is the problem.
When you're shooting,
And-
would you light it, those areas?
Well, you're talking to a guy who used to light things. Most people don't. They just shoot whatever the light happens to be. But yes, I would. I would light this, and I would light it in a way that would help to delineate the edges and to
Okay.
raise those values compared to the background, and that would make a big difference. Yes.
Well, Dave lights things, so I know he'll appreciate that comment.
Dennis, you're so true. Bryson, I really appreciate those comments. Thank you.
Very good.
No problem. No problem at all. Cloud layers at sunrise. You saw something interesting and you captured it fairly well. I don't see any problem with the basic overalls. You've got, you know, good contrast and basic overall capture. I don't see the image as a competition image. I see it more as a, hey, look what I saw when I got up this morning. And that's pretty much all the further I can make it go. I don't see any leading lines to a primary subject. It actually looks to me like the kind of thing I would call a background looking for a subject. There isn't any real subject here, if you ignore the sun, maybe. So it just is, it's an element, but it doesn't have any real place to go. And I don't want to be super negative about that. It's just that, you know, the image doesn't have anything that makes me want to pay attention to anything in particular, if that makes any sense. All done. Anybody want to own up to this one?
Yeah, that's me, Rod Fraser. I guess I'll own up to that. And basically, that's exactly what I did. It had a really good, I mean, it looked really neat when I took a when I took the picture. And so I wasn't really looking at anything in particular other than the entire picture in itself.
Right. I got millions of them, so don't feel bad. Very good, sir. Very good. And the last one. Now, there's two things here. One of them is I see pincushion distortion on the image. If you don't know what I'm talking about, this should be a straight line across here, but it's smaller here, and bigger in the middle. So it has a curved distortion to it. That curve shows up here, doesn't show up as much here. And of course, the closer to center you get, the less that will be. There is a checkbox in the lens correction profile section of Lightroom that you should have checked to enable the profile corrections, which will eliminate that distortion automatically, and then you don't have to deal with it. And you should turn that on and leave it on. This image to be needs to be balanced better. You've got a natural thing going on over here. I would mimic this amount by this over here. So I'd crop this right-hand edge off so that you have more of a symmetrical composition. So you've got the same amount of room on the right as you have on the left, and this ends up being dead center. That, I think, would really enhance this tremendously. I would make very, very sure that this vertical is perfectly vertical, and there are ways in Lightroom to deal with that as well. And they're not difficult at all to do. And then once you had this cropped so that you have this as a totally symmetrical image, I get rid of this thing. This one seems to want to be there because it supports the possibility of a railing going down behind this one. But this one I think is distracting. Then once you've got that done, you could leave it as a color image if you wanted to, but to me, this thing screams for black and white. This looks to me like it needs to be a black and white image, and I would tend to want to go there. So that's all I got to say about that.
That's fine, Bryson. I thank you for the critique. I did think of balancing that, but I didn't. I just thought it looked too compressed, so I did this and it was wrong. And I did use the transform slider or whatever you want to call it on this to make it straight, but that's how the top came out. So I didn't know what else to do after that, you know, once I used transform. And I never thought of taking that little bulb out of there, but you're right, it should be taken out. And I never thought of black and white either. So I'm looking forward to see what black and white looks like with this and centering it too. Thank you.
Well, double check to make sure that that profile is enabled, because I think that has more to do with this than what you did in terms of, you know, manipulating it. But I can't be sure because I don't know exactly what you did. Okay. But yeah, this to me just it's so monochromatic with the exception of the grass that it just says to me, why not just go all the way? And then, you know, with this in the middle and the equals out here, the symmetry just seems to me to be the obvious way to balance the image. So, but that's me. You know, you can disagree.
No, I'm going to try. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You are most welcome.
Oh, very nice,
Okay.
Bryson. Very nice. Thank you. I'd like to open it up to see if anybody has any questions or comments, either for Bryson or one of the photographers. Any questions or comments? Bryson, that was an excellent analysis of the photos. Really enjoyed that.
Dennis, can I make a comment about the photograph, which I really liked, with the sort of the tunnel to the woman at the end and the green bushes on the side?
Yeah, Elaine's photograph. Yep.
I really like that. What about a square crop? I wonder if that might bring the wall leading right to the person there, if you just cropped off to the right, you'd have the diagonal almost in the corner.
Right.
Just a comment.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you crop something, you can decide where all four of these go. And it, you know, I don't try necessarily to go for a particular aspect ratio, like go to a square, go to an 8x10 or something like that. I just go until it feels good. And as soon as it feels good, I'm happy. And then I don't want to go any further than that. So, you know, you disagree. You may just simply say, well, if it were my photograph, I would do this. That's perfectly acceptable.
Do you
And
think
that's what you should?
Do you think a
Yeah,
square
I think
crop
where the
might,
wall, where the wall hits the sidewalk, I think I would put that, I would try that in the corner, right exactly there. You know, just see how it looked. I like the photograph.
Yeah, I do too.
Very good.
Good.
Bryson, this is Rich Scar. This is a comment for an ever ongoing discussion, I'm sure. I have a tendency, I understand completely what you and others have said, and I agree with it totally about removing distractions from, let's keep, we could say on this picture, removing distractions. However, the way that I kind of function, maybe I think others as well, is you're right in terms of what captures your eye immediately. But the second part of that is, again, what holds your eye in there and makes it move around in the picture, in the photograph. So I tend to like this because I think, given the corrections you suggested, I agree with, that capture you with it. But I happen strangely to like that sign in there because my eye, after looking initially, I'm kind of moving around the picture. I'm looking at the bushes, the hedges on the left. I'm essentially getting myself immersed in the picture after that first glance. I think you're right. You have to capture it, but it's more of a discussion, I think, than a conclusion.
Again, I think you're perfectly, that's a legitimate comment. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I suspect that what you're trying to say with the picture is going to change with whether you keep this or not, because if this influences why she's there, then it becomes important.
Good point. Good point.
Right? If it doesn't have anything to do with why she's there, then maybe it disappears. So it becomes is the picture a dialogue, or is the picture there for just simply its elements, and it doesn't really have anything to do with a conversation? So that's up to the photographer. And there's two people in every photograph, as Ansel Adams said, the person that made the photograph and the person who's looking at the photograph. And they do not necessarily have the same opinion of what's going on.
Yeah, great.
So,
good point. Good point, Bryson. Thanks.
Yeah, Rich, thanks for asking that. I was thinking pondering the same question, thinking of Ian Plant and his complex compositions with multiple areas of interest. Very good. Other questions or comments?
I just want to say it was a great review. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, would
Dennis,
everybody please unmute
Dennis?
them? Yes.
Dennis, you said for Bryson to keep in the back of his mind, what is a competition photo?
Do we want to deal with that now?
Yes.
I don't know how much time it'll take Bryson to explain that.
You got 30 seconds now.
Bryson, yeah, do you want to give him a teaser on that one?
Yeah, I probably would want to give that more thought, but I'll give you a thumbnail. A photo has to have a certain amount of impact. It has to have a reason to exist. And when you look at the image, it should tell you a story, or it should impart some kind of information. It depends on what the purpose of the photograph is. Obviously, a photograph that was intended for an advertising piece is going to speak differently to the people looking at it than something that's intended to be a social statement or something of that nature. So the intention of the photographer has a lot to do with it. And then whether or not that photographer can transfer that thought process to the viewer becomes important. And the ability of the photographer to make that come across to the viewer can have an impact on the success of that photograph. And then if it goes into a competition, the competition is also a determining factor. If it's going into a fine art competition, it's going to be looked at differently than if it's going into a commercial competition or some other kind of competition. So I could put some very, very nice architectural photographs into a competition and have them disappear into Never Never Land because the person was looking to create a book on art and landscapes, and my architectures, as good as they are, had nothing to do with what he was trying to accomplish. So you need to have both the thought process of, okay, what is the purpose of this photograph? What is the competition? How's the competition going to see the image? And then how much impact does the image have that enables it to stay in or rise in the competition toward the top, if you will.
Do you have any suggestions for how people can divorce themselves from the emotion of a personal photograph and look at it objectively?
Nope.
Well, thanks. I think sometimes, you know, we're caught up in the moment of it's my photograph. I was there. I experienced it. I was at the Grand Canyon. I could smell this. I could see that. The wind was blowing in my face. And to somebody else that wasn't there, it just lacks, you know, they.
Absolutely. And that's the problem. The problem is that you carry into the photograph all of the experiences of the situation and all of the memories, et cetera, but somebody looking at that photograph doesn't have that. They don't have any of that information in their head. So you are either talking to them or you're not. And so how do you divorce, as the maker, how do you divorce yourself from the image? You can't. I have pictures that are absolute favorites of mine that when I share them with other people, they just don't get it at all. So it's a personal thing, and I don't think you can divorce yourself from it. Over time, I think maybe you learn how to be a little bit more sensitive to whether a photograph will fly, if you will, with the people you're going to share it with. But you know, good luck with that.
I know
Bryson,
some. Go ahead.
Do you think that, and I know myself, I do, when I work at developing those emotions into my picture in my processing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I know some
Every
photographers
image has a yeah, go ahead, Des.
Yeah. Some folks say that they'll wait like a week or 2 weeks or a month to process their images in an attempt to divorce themselves from the emotion of the image. I don't know if that works or not. I never do that. You know, I want to work on them right away.
I can't do that. I work on pictures that I shot 7 years ago, and as soon as I see the image, I'm right back there.
Yeah.
So, you know, it just I have a visual memory that's just simply the way this funny old brain works, and so I can look at an image that I shot out west 7 or 8 years ago and just instantly go, I remember the day, I remember the temperature, I remember the feel,
Yes.
I remember why I shot this picture. So I can't divorce myself from that. But I agree entirely with the idea that putting the emotion into the image is very valuable. In fact, I think that may help you enhance the image from the concept that this is the story I want to tell, because that's all that there's emotion in that too. There's emotion in this picture right here. Is she sad or is she leaving at the end of the day? Which is, you know, I actually took a class from a master photographer once whose entire process of the class was how to title a picture. Now, if you can imagine that,
Yeah.
because it will influence how you see the picture. That's all there is to it.
Okay. Well, Patty, during the presentation Wednesday night, I'll look for you to explain to us how you do that. You know, how do you get the emotion into your images? So hopefully that'll be part of your presentation.
It actually is.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Anything else? Anyone else have any other comments or questions before we wrap things up here? Excellent evening. Great discussion. Good job, guys. Hey, would you please unmute yourselves? I think Bryson deserves a big round of applause. Very nice.
Thanks, Bryson.
Thanks, Bryson.
Very much.
We're here.
Raising that bar. Way to go.
Good.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Where did you go?